You have, I believe, their biographies in front of you. If you picked up one of these little leaflets, I will just go through them very quickly. On my far left, is Denby Fawcett. She's a columnist for Civil Beat now, but this is a woman who started reporting at age 15 years, writing a column, a teen column. Let's just say Denby's been around. She reported for KITV for 23 years, most recently as chief political editor. She covered the Vietnam War for the Honolulu Advertiser and later returned to Vietnam to continue reporting. Denby is co-author of War-Torn Stories, War-Torn, Stories of War from the women reporters who covered Vietnam. Denby's most recent book is Secrets of Diamond Head, A History and Trail Guide. She's a big-time walker. She's been inducted in the Associated Press Television and Radio Association Hall of Fame for a lifetime of journalistic achievement. Denby graduated from Punahou School and is a graduate of Columbia University with a BA in Spanish. Patty Epler, also on my left, Patty is the editor of Civil Beat and editor-in-chief of HuffPost. I like that. HuffPost. There's something to that. She's been a reporter and editor since 1976 when she began writing a column for the Anchorage Times. Patty moved to Hawaii in 1982, worked for Honolulu Magazine, then returned to Alaska. In 1989, she was a member of the Anchorage Daily News team that won the Pulitzer Prize Gold Medal for public service for a series on alcoholism and self-destructive behavior among Alaska natives. Patty has also worked at the Tacoma News Tribune, the all-weekly Phoenix News Time, and was project editor and city editor at the East Valley Tribune, where she won her second Pulitzer Prize. You know, some of us would have been happy with one. In 2009, in the local reporting category for directing that paper series on the immigration enforcement practices of a colorful local sheriff. Beth Ann Kozlovit is right here beside me. Beth Ann is Hawaii Public Radio's talk shows executive producer and oversees HPR's 5 locally produced talk programs. She created and co-hosts HPR2's weekday morning show, The Conversation, which launched in 2011. In 1999, she created and began moderating Town Square, HPR's long-running live public affairs forum. A woman with lives on radio and in the business of nonprofits, she is a former Hawaii anchor of NPR's Morning Edition. Her attraction to public radio began when it was the only car-accessible, parent-approved station. So all of this really is her mother's fault. Moms always get blamed. And Catherine Cruz has been with KITV4 News for the last 2 decades, working as a beat reporter covering City Hall, business, consumer, and health issues. In 1999, she received the Media Award for consistent and accurate reporting from the Hawaii State Teachers Association. In 1997, she was honored with the Media Progress Award by the United Filipino Council, and in 1991, the State Health Department recognized her work on a joint project with Kaiser Permanente's pediatric department. Originally from Guam, Catherine attended college at San Francisco State University, where she studied broadcast journalism. She also attended Santa Clara University, where she focused on liberal arts. Now, why with this much talent sitting around here, 4 women of this kind of ability, and I assume of women with equal ability in newsrooms around the country, why in 1999 were there 36% of newsroom staff were women, and in 2014, 36% still is all the percentage of women in newsrooms? Got an answer, my dear?
Well, I don't know the answer to that really, because in our newsroom we have pretty much 50% women. We have quite a few women reporters, both at Civil Beat and at HuffPost Hawaii, where frankly the entire staff, except for one, is women. But I think it's because there's such demands on women for the families still, and even though my generation, and we won't talk about my ex-husband, but maybe a little, did not really help out with childcare. But these days, the guys really are stepping up. And my deputy editor is devoted to his family, and is trying to make it easier for his wife, who's a radio journalist, to pursue her career. But I think it's still a big issue now for women to be in the workplace instead of at home, especially in our business. It's very demanding.
Cindy, you've called it a patriarchy, the newsroom. It's run by men. Still is?
Well, I think it mirrors society in general. So we're looking at a newsroom and saying it's a patriarchy, but you have to look at the world in general, and still the top corporate jobs aren't going to women. I mean, now you see occasionally in news that for the first time in the history of the New York Times, the executive editor is a woman, Jill Abramson, and she says that half their leadership team now is women, but it's still very unusual to see. In my life as a reporter, I've had only one woman news director all the time that I've been a reporter, since I've been 15. And the only time I did have a woman boss was when I was just graduated from college and worked on a part of the newspaper then called the women's page. They had a special page because it was assumed that women would only be interested in gardening and weddings and parties. And at that time, this was at the Honolulu Star Bulletin, there were only 2 women in the newsroom doing Harveys. And they were pretty tough. They were like, man.
Any thoughts on this, about that? Why hasn't it grown, the numbers?
I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing in this business. This, for me, I've often joked.
We'll take notes. We could help you.
Anybody can, I know you can. But the truth of the matter is, I never planned to be a journalist. I've been doing journalism since I was in the 5th grade and swore up one side and down the other, this was not going to be my career. I mean, I had started businesses, I was working in business, and then moved here to be with my family and found myself in conversation with someone about what I thought really should be focused on at public radio. And she said, good, let's go talk to them. So we went to talk to them. This is 15 or 16 years ago. And the next thing I knew, I was doing this program. And suddenly, juggling a couple of different lives, my business life and the life on the radio, and then one began to consume the others. And I wondered how much I've consumed on a daily basis. But really, I think it's a calling, journalism still, very much so. And it's very trying. There are many, many challenges. I have 3 children. And frankly, if I hadn't had my mother and help to be able to make everything happen, I don't think I could have done it. And like everything else, I think that the big thing we have to face is that there are always choices you have to make, and you don't get to do everything at once. And if you think you can, good luck, let me know, and we'll see how that works out, because I thought so too. And then you wake up to some reality, and you find that, in fact, you need to make choices, and you do different things at different times, and it's worked out, for me, pretty well.
Catherine, you've raised 2 boys.
A son and a daughter. 2 children.
Son and daughter. Well, long career in television. Has it been trying?
It was at first. I think I mentioned that when I started Channel 4 in the 80s, they had a big strike, and the strike was over the management wasn't paying women as much as they were paying the men, and it was a big deal. And so I have to give my hat off to the women reporters who were on that strike line, because I came in afterwards. But when I did get married and had started to have children, I was the first reporter that had been pregnant in that newsroom for 12 years. Nobody had kids. So I was really kind of scared at first. I thought, what are they going to do? And, but, I worked it out. I worked up to my due date. The photographers were very worried. Well, what do we do when it's time? They were scared. Like, you call 911, and what do you do if you have a lead story and you have to go off and give birth? Because it was a new and strange thing. But so it was trying. It was very hard. I fortunately was able to raise both of my children, and my schedules worked out, because sometimes it's better to work the early morning shift with young kids, and you want to be there at night to read them stories and tuck them in at bed. So fortunately for me, it worked out. I worked different shifts, and I know a lot of women can't say that. We've had children in our newsroom and other newsrooms because they've had to juggle things. But I've been very fortunate. I'm on the other end. My children are graduating from college, and I've been able to raise my family on a reporter salary, and thank my lucky stars that I've had a fabulous job and have been able to do both. It was hard, and I had to put up with bosses who were very patronizing. I remember I was 9 months pregnant, and I wanted to go on this ship, and I went in expecting I was going to cover this story, and I wasn't assigned to it, and I was like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't that be my decision? And they said, well, we just thought in your condition you didn't want to go out and do this. And I'm like, well, let that be my decision. And so I was able to cover it. So you just have to kind of stick up for yourself and deal with that. But I was very fortunate to have raised my kids in a very high-pressure job, and was very fortunate. Very fortunate.
But has it ever gotten, I mean, I was thinking this afternoon, that in the legal profession, you go to a law firm around town, you see a lot more female lawyers than you did 20 years ago, a lot more. Or in the medical profession, or at the university, the faculty, it seems to me, increasingly, if it's not 50-50, it's 40-60, it's very close. University enrollment now, it's women. I mean, almost every campus you go to, women out, undergraduate women more than men. Why hasn't there been a leap over the last 15 or 20 years from 36 to something and not up to 36? That doesn't make sense. What stopped it?
But I think, though, even just looking at the numbers, I mean, you can say there are a lot of women lawyers and there are a lot of women doctors, but there are not a lot of women law partners. And so that's...
Well, then, has it been a matter of time? Is that the problem? That women, there's not been enough women in the newsroom to rise to management positions?
No, I think it's a matter of power, that men are used to having power and used to holding it. And when you get to the higher levels, that a lot of them aren't used to acquiescing that. So that's one part. There are other reasons, but that's one.
Agreed?
My experience has not been that there have not been a lot of women in the newsrooms. I mean, the newsrooms that I've worked in, and I've probably worked in more than anybody up here, there have been women editors, like even back in the 70s, when I was at the Anchorage Times, the managing editor was the top ranked woman in the newsroom, the top editor in the newsroom was a woman. The Kay Fanning, who owned the Anchorage Daily News, was a very strong woman, went on to be the editor of the Christian Science Monitor. Women nowadays own online publications because it's just what they do. I mean, I've always worked for, I've had a mix of men and women bosses and owners, and since I've been in management, we've had a good mix of women in the newsroom. So,
well, journalism is hard. That's one thing I think we need to acknowledge too. And journalism is changing. The same kind of newsrooms that we had 30 years ago are not the same kind of newsrooms that we have now, particularly in radio and communications. There's so much more that a woman can do that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in a newsroom, in a physical place. That's opened things up a little bit, but it still means that someone's going to have to be reasonably discerning in choosing to find that person and to follow that person and to feel what they have to say is worth reading. There's more competition, and maybe that means that there are more opportunities too, but it is a real changed situation. My department, Talk at Public Radio, isn't attached to the news department. We are co-equal. We do little different things. We do them in concert together. So it's not as if I have a news director to whom I report. I report directly to Michael Titterton, who's president of HBR. So it's a different setup for us. A lot of women who work at public radio are in different parts of it, not necessarily people who you hear on the air, but Kayla Rosenfeld was once upon a time news director, and she did that for 11, 12 years. So it's been a real mix as we've watched the development of public radio here and continue to watch it as it moves into other arenas and has become the statewide entity that it is.
Have you felt the oppression of a patriarchy?
Not really.
Oh, come on.
No, no.
Please, tell me you did.
No, I don't know what your numbers are, if those are print numbers, but, I think I've always worked in a newsroom where there were a lot of women, and right now, we have a lot of women in our newsroom. We have, an anchors in the morning, they're all female, anchor at 5, 2 anchors at 6, both female, and the 10 o'clock, we have a male and a female. Where most folks, want a Ken and a Barbie, so I think we've got a lot of women on air and working out in the field. So I don't know about maybe bosses, but quite honestly, my experience has been I would prefer just gender neutral. I just want a good boss. I don't care if they're male or female. I want someone who's fair and who comes from a good journalistic place, and that's what I look for. I don't care if my immediate boss is a woman or a man. I just want to have a good boss who realizes you have to balance both, a career and a family. And fortunately, I think right now at KITV we have a fabulous boss. I have a wonderful news director, and he sees that. And so I think I'm very fortunate.
Well, what would you say as I imagine there may be a few in the audience, what would you say to a young woman, a young undergraduate student, female, who says, I want to be a journalist? From your experience in a town, you've said you've lost a few jobs because papers have gone under, right? We've had two television stations become one television station. We're one newspaper town instead of. What would you say to a young woman? Yeah, go into journalism. It's going to be fun. You've got lots of opportunity. You know, I'm looking for help here. Help me.
Well, I take interns. I have interns all the time. So we have these ongoing conversations. But it depends on what brand of journalism you want. Do you want print? Do you want to be doing something like Civil Beat, do something online? Do you want radio? It depends on what some of the experience is. But the same kind of rudimentary fundamentals have to be there. And very often we have conversations about doing research and how much research has to be done. And somebody will say to me, well, so-and-so said this. And my next question is, well, how do you know that's true? And we've had to have these ongoing conversations, as bizarre as that may seem. Some of those things just don't tend to be drilled in, and there is an idea that it's maybe easier than it really is, or that it's less time-consuming than it's going to be, or that somehow it's going to be far more glamorous than it really is. And just really trying to give the realities of it. When someone says, I want to go into journalism, I say, really, why? Tell me why. And then make sure. And are you willing to do the work?
Would you encourage anybody?
I would. Journalism is just an absolutely fabulous business to be in, and it's really important that the public has reporters, writers, researchers that they can trust for unbiased news source. So it's a really fundamental part of democracy for us. I never look back from the time I sort of stumbled into my first newspaper job in 1976 or whatever it was, and I never regretted going into it at all. You have to really want to save the world, though. That's the thing. If you're just in it because you think you're a good writer or it might be kind of fun, that's not a real good reason. We try to screen out people from who just have to have that idea. But and I don't know about television, but the print business and the online business don't really pay that well. And so
radio.
Yeah, and so we're always kind of in the middle of the pack, I would guess, in terms of salaries. And in fact, I've seen some surveys that put reporters at the bottom underneath, garbage truck drivers or something. Yeah, and so it's really a calling, as Beth Ann mentioned, and you have to really, really want to do it for the right reason, and then you can make it all work out.
Would you let your daughter go into journalism?
I don't think I'd stop her.
Come on, Debbie, would you?
No, for someone that wants to do it, I would say, do it. You know, if you love that and you enjoy it, and there's opportunity now that there wasn't there before with all online reporting. It's still going to be the same tough thing. And Patty said it doesn't pay well, and that's like one reason you talk about all the women you see in newsrooms. That may be part of the reason, you know, and the pay's gotten lower since Catherine and I started at KITV. The starting pay for people is low, but if it's something that you like, it's an incredible privilege and an opportunity and an honor to be a journalist. I mean, you see things that nobody else sees, and you have access to people that even very rich people can't just go up and talk to. It's amazing. You can call up the governor and say, I need to see you and talk to you about this. And if you're a curious person, unstoppably curious, it just gives you a license to ask all kinds of questions. You know, one can say you're being rude or bad because you're not asking a question for yourself. I used to think when I was covering political stories, I was asking a question for the secretary of Hawaiian Tel, who was at her job and couldn't go up to the governor and say, hey, what's with this stupid bill that you signed that you shouldn't have or something, and I can ask in a more polite way than that, of course. I mean, I wouldn't stop anybody from doing anything they want to do, even if it's being a garbage collector, which is a good job here too, because you can work really hard and then take off for the rest of the day and have a second career. Yeah.
And my plumber makes more than I do. It's a good.
Pardon me?
I said, my plumber makes more than I do.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's been absolutely the best job. Would I encourage my daughter to get into it? She's more math and economics, and she's graduating this year, and so you know, her mind is in a different place, but it has been absolutely the best job. And I think you have to mention with newspapers and TV that we're just kind of in a world of hurt right now because of the internet. Everything's changing. All of the constants that we knew have just been turned on their heads. And so the way I see it now, I'm really kind of just keeping my head above water because it's changing so much. TV is losing viewers, newspapers are losing readers, and we're trying to figure out, you know, what's the next platform, how do we adapt, and that's probably the hardest thing right now is just, you know, you're in this tidal wave and you're trying to make sense of it and you're trying to keep grounded. So it's a tough time, but it has been absolutely the best job, and I wouldn't have done anything different.
I don't have a daughter. I mean, I think I'm the only one up here who doesn't. I have 3 boys. It's a totally different life. Too much damn testosterone in life. But all that aside, there's tremendous opportunity. If you're really considering a career in journalism, you know, don't downplay the opportunities that are there. I mean, that's always the flip side of it. You're just going to have to figure it out in a different way because some of those models aren't there anymore. It's not the path that used to be, you do this and this and this, or you know, as the music goes around and around and comes out here, as my grandmother would say. It doesn't work that way anymore. But that means that if you are inventive and you're curious, and curiosity is a big part of it, and you love what you do. I mean, how many people do you really run into who say, I love what I do. It gets me up in the morning. And if that's what does it for you, that's a very good thing. The joy factor is pretty important.
Maybe I've been talking to the wrong journalist. I hear a sort of deep and abiding sense of doom over the long-term future of certainly of print and of major league TV. I mean, the four big networks. Every time we held a show, somebody would always ask, now how many people do you guys really have signed up for online news? What's your numbers? And whoever would be there would always refuse to give us any numbers from you guys. They're trying to point out, you guys haven't made the sell yet, have you?
Are you asking me?
Yes. No comment. Case closed. Yeah. online has not been, that sense of doom, and also the cynicism. Yeah, the excitement about journalism. But it's the same thing. Every day you're going after a story. Somebody happened over here. Something happened over here. We were talking about that earlier. Something, it's the same thing every day. It's not every way you get up and, it's going to be fun and dandy. It's going to be real adventure.
But it's not the same thing. At least for me, you don't know what you're going to be doing every day. So that's kind of the excitement of it. You just never know what you're going to be thrown into, and you just have to learn to be a quick study. You have to figure out who's the important person to talk to in the room that you walk into. I don't know. It's just it's a great job. The pay's not the greatest, and you've had to over the years you make do, I guess, but you have to love it. And right now in the newsroom, instead of just concentrating on the TV part, we're required to post on Facebook and Google Plus, and they give us iPhones. We go out and we shoot pictures in the day, and we send it back to the newsroom, and that becomes our picture for Facebook. We tweet. I was talking to someone here earlier about how, for the same-sex marriage session, that was my baptism by fire. They said, well, you have to tweet, so half my followers are church people and half my followers are, gay groups, because on that day I was taking pictures and drumming things and learning how to tweet. But you've got to learn to move with the technology, and I would say if you're going into journalism, you've got to go online. You just have to. I don't know where TV's going to be. I don't know where newspapers are going to be in another 10 years, but you've got to go online. You've got it.
I would say I do know where radio is going to be. Radio is going to be healthy and well. I mean, everyone wanted to say that radio was going to go away when TV happened, and then everything was going to go away when online happened. Well, take a look at the numbers for radio, particularly public radio. It's been moving and growing at almost astronomical levels, because there's still something about the human voice. There is still something about that intimate connection that happens when you and I are meeting over the airwaves and we are talking about something or listening to something that affects us deeply and personally. And yeah, do I love it? Yeah, I love it. It has a lot of inherent issues with it too, and some of them are not that different from yours, but there's still the ability to tell a story, the fact that we love to hear stories. There was a book that came out a couple years ago called The Storytelling Animal. This is part of who we are, and it's part of why we love to listen to the radio, particularly when the story is well told, and as you want to define that story, you can do that as you will, but the idea that there's something that happens with a human voice, and that's very important.
Patty, you can have no comment. You're allowed that. But are you bullish on? You don't have to give us numbers. Are you bullish on the future of online journalism?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think everything's moving to online. It's just people haven't really figured out the business model yet that works. As the advertising is kind of still in print, and so we're trying to figure out how to make money in an online world. And there's lots of different things that but I think online is exciting. I mean, I used to be basically really down on the internet, and in 2007, I guess it was, I went to a Poynter Institute, which is a journalism think tank that you guys should all sign up for and follow. I went to a seminar there on multi-platform reporting, and thought, what is a platform? I mean, I don't know even what it was. And I said in my little presentation, I'm not a big fan of the internet because it's like it's all Britney Spears. And it's like we're contributing to the downfall of civilization. Pandering, to these like celebrity things. But then people at the seminar started showing some of the fabulous journalism they were doing, and you could, unlike print, which is, like newspapers, which is very flat, and you have a newspaper and you open it up and here's a picture and a headline and a story. But on the web, you can post documents, you can put videos, you can. One story that someone showed us was about a train that had derailed outside of San Bernardino in California, and people were killed by chlorine gas escaping, and they played the 9/11 phone calls. I mean, it was so powerful. And when you combine all of that online, it's just really amazing what you can do in the online world, and I think that's what will bring people to the great storytelling that Batman is doing on the radio. We have audio online as well, we have video, so it sort of combines the best of everything. So I'm like really excited about the future of online. If we could just figure out
How to make money, yes, how to make money. Jill Abramson, Mike Webb sent this quote around. She's the executive editor of the New York Times, and she wrote that the idea that women journalists bring a different taste in stories or sensibility isn't true. Everybody here just loves a good story and the story behind the story. Now, you know, when I vote for women politicians, and I have a tendency to vote for women because I think that I've known enough male politicians to know that I don't like their sensibility, and I think women bring a better sensibility to power. Do women bring a different sensibility to management of news organizations? Can they? Thoughts on this?
I do think, I mean, I do think women bring a different sensibility. There's a famous story about an editor in Oregon, Sandy Rupp, who would call a reporter or an editor into her office. She was that top editor, and just chew them out at the same time she was sewing a button onto their coat because, you know, it had fallen off or whatever. And so I do think women see things a little bit differently, and it's hard to articulate, to tell you the truth, because there are sensitive males out there. But you know, but I think we just tend to take a little bit more of a step back and tend to be a little more less sort of power hungry, maybe, and more sort of welcoming of different points of view.
Well, Jill Abramson raised that. She said that women as leaders, by her experience, are more collaborative. And she thought that was a good style for a newsroom because you have all these weird personalities you have to work with, and it's hard if you're not inclusive, if you're dictatorial to people. So I agree with that. I think it's true that women are collaborative.
I was at an event, a women's event, and it was hosted by an admiral who happens to be a woman, and she's in charge of the Pacific region. And she said that she had difficulty rising in the ranks because of the thinking at the time in the military was, you know, by the time you hit whatever 50 or 55, you hit menopause, and the thinking was, well, when you get to that, you know, point in your life, sometimes you don't always make sense. And so they didn't want a woman in control running the military branch, you know, who was going through menopause. But, you know, that was the thinking, you know. But we've got, you know, a terrific, you know, admiral here in charge. And but it was an interesting event because you could see, you know, what she's had to, the glass ceiling that she's had to break in order to get where she's at, you know. Is she a better boss? I saw her kind of directing a lot of the coasties who were, you know, part of the event. So I don't know how they see a woman boss, if, you know, if they're treated differently. But, you know, I think maybe it was kind of comforting because maybe she's a mother figure, I don't know, and there's more trust. I don't know, just an interesting point of view coming from her.
I think it's important to say some women are or could be. When we paint with such big brushes, all women, all men, you know, it just, a lot gets lost there, and there are subtleties and nuances that we miss. You know, brains aren't fungible. Men's brains, women's brains, they are different. We are fundamentally different, and that's a good thing. And if we can look at strengths and weaknesses of both and be able to see how those can function well in a newsroom setting or in frankly any business, that would be a good thing. I tend to shy away from better, yeah, it's a funny word to say because it automatically puts somebody down. Some men are better than some women are better than some men. It's just nice to acknowledge that we are fundamentally different. I mean, I have memories of my mother in the 70s coming home in a power suit and, you know, some really silly, frilly thing, and then another assorted strange neckwear she wore at that time. And, you know, it's like, Mom, why? Why? I mean, I didn't want her to come home in little frilly dresses either. I just wanted her to be who she was, and she finally got that, and that was a very good thing. But when women tried to aid men, or in the whole sensitive guy thing that women found out they really don't want after all, you know, you got to just be who you are and be able to play to your own strengths, but be willing to listen. But I do think women are, by very nature, much more collaborative, and that part, talking to some of the brain guys that I talk to, behavioral folks, that really say that some of the strengths that women have are that there's a tendency for us to gather together and try to share information in a different way without having to necessarily be combative about it or competitive about it. Although some women are highly competitive, but it's how they go about it, how that competition shows itself. So I think we need some levels here when we talk about it.
Not good at levels. This media study that was done this past year, they were pointing out that columnists were overwhelmingly old white men.
That would fit your description.
She's known you long enough where she can say that and get away with it.
We old white men are taking a lot of abuse these days. We're getting used to it. 4 times as many male columnists as female columnists at the 3 biggest papers and 4 newspaper syndicates. The Washington Post has 25 male columnists to 7 women, and the New York Times 10 male columnists to 2 women. Now, why is that? Is that just the old boys club taking care of each other, or do we frankly, we old white men just have more to say?
If that's the fantasy you want to perpetuate, it's
Any thoughts on why aren't there? You've got one?
So let's see, I have 1 woman, and then I have 2, 3, no, let's see, I guess I have 3 men over the age of 50, and then as columnists, and then I have 1 who's 40-ish, I would say.
So don't you have an old white political scientist guy who writes a column occasionally? He creaks when he walks. And,
Okay, so here's my view on hiring, to tell you the truth, whether it's old, young, women, men, or whatever. You know, I really want to hire people who have something to say, right? So, and who are good at what they do. And so I've seen a lot of women who have been promoted simply because they're women. And there was a time in the 80s and early 90s when, you know, there was a rush for diversity in newsrooms, and there still is somewhat, but, you know, but people who should never have been put in jobs that they were put in, you know, were getting promoted, and that's just wrong because it causes a lot of problems. So, so here in Honolulu, Civil Beat is in particular trying to establish itself as a you know, credible news source, and we've come a long way in our 4 years. But if I can hire Denby and Neil, who are like top of the line, I'm going to do that, you know, and I don't actually really care how old they are or how young they are, because they're great, you know, and it really helps my news operation grow. And so that's sort of what it's my hiring, not. So, you know, so do we end up with old white people? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a white person, so I mean, that's kind of hard. You know.
It's a kind of discrimination, though. I'm deeply worried about it. Any thoughts on this, Beth?
old white guys? Well,
Oh my God.
On occasion, sometimes Michael says that he falls into the old white guy category, but you know, we don't have a whole lot of them when you walk around public radio. A lot of youthful talent, a lot of people who have something to say, but a really variety of ages, and they're not really in that way. My crew, I have some that are in early 60s all the way down to 25. And the mix is a nice thing, it's a good thing.
One of the other things that the report pointed out was there are virtually no women in sports journalism. Or if they are, they're eye candy, that says hello to the coach as he's running off at halftime, ask him why aren't you winning, and so forth. Why are there not enough? Why are more women not being assigned to sports journalism?
I think women are too smart.
They don't.
Go ahead. You got to tell me more than that.
No, I follow baseball, but I hate basketball, so I'm not the best person to wax on sports.
Well, I count on that, but it was interesting that the columnist, that's interesting to me because I was thinking, like, Dan and I are interested in politics, and while you were talking, I was thinking, when I go, I need an analyst to interview sometimes to go with my stories, and I don't have any woman I ever call. Like I call Neil, I have a Dylan Onaka on the Big Island, I have a bunch of people I call, like I ask you, but I'd ask the question too, why is that? And is it that women maybe don't put themselves out so much as men do as experts? It's part of that female holding back to not be so boastful, and I don't know the answer. I'm just ruminating.
Just one more adjective like that, I'm going to throw this at you.
No, but it is interesting because I read that study too and started thinking of that. I read the New York Times on Sunday, that opinion page, and now they're bringing more women in, but they're writing features. They're not writing hardcore political analysis.
It is interesting, and you may know the answer to this, since this is kind of your field. Why aren't there more women political experts in Honolulu, in Hawaii?
Well, because Bereka Milner and I have sort of we've cornered it all. There hasn't been any real need, I don't think. I don't know. I think one, you have to dig into the culture and into the town. I think sometimes people in academia who are coming into the town, a political scientist might be closer in what he's interested in, what he does his research in, with people in North Carolina and Chicago, at universities on the mainland, than they are ever looking at say, the politics of Hawaii, and so they don't dig in. So you're more likely to find them among the journalists. Milner's an exception, but he gets pretty airy-fairy sometimes. But anyway, I don't want to just beat up on him because he's in the army.
Well, I was talking to an economist.
What's that?
I was talking to an economist, and she's female, and she was kind of lamenting that she doesn't get called. It's always the men in the department. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of our fault, that we don't make an effort to call to say, okay, there are 6 men here and 2 women. Why don't we call this woman? So maybe some of that is our fault.
It was brought out in that study that women journalists call men. It's true what you're saying.
I try not to do that, though. I mean, because of that, I know that there's sort of that bias that if there's a woman and a man, I will call the woman.
That's good.
And I think the more of us that do that and make it known that, we want to talk to you, and make it okay for them to talk to us too, the better off it'll be.
But isn't there a problem sometimes in simply finding the people? I'm always struck by how often that you do go to somebody because it's easy and you're on a deadline and you know the person and you're after a few lines or whatever. So you don't necessarily fight around and find out who's there.
Yeah, I think we are under deadlines all the time, and it is about turning things around. And so maybe we were guilty of being lazy. We aren't doing enough to find other people. That they're the go-to guys. So maybe we need to do more of that.
Someone brought up the issue of programs like Homeland. No, not Homeland, House of Cards, right? Where the reporter in House of Cards is an attractive gal who talks to the speaker. He's the Speaker of the House, right? Speaker of the House of Representatives.
I believe it's the majority leader.
The majority leader. and she gets her news and so forth by sleeping women. Now, what does that do to the image? And they used another example, Blood Diamond. I don't know that show, but apparently is that? But I'm not going to ask anybody if they slept with anybody. But what I'm asking is, those kinds of images of a reporter are often in the press, in movies anyway.
Well, it's entertainment, though. I mean, there are all kinds of slutty women in every show that you have, on the air.
But how do you like the idea of a slutty reporting woman?
Well, they're drawn very broadly, the characters. So they're extremely sexual or extremely slutty. I love this show called Revenge. There are tons of slutty women on that.
Are they reporters?
No, they're not. They're socialites.
But last year, I was in Homeland, there was a reporter who was a spy. And she was quite duplicitous. I mean, she was nasty for the business. And yes, this stuff is it's TV. And when we start thinking that anything on TV is some sort of mirror of real reality, including reality TV, well, then we got a problem. So we know we don't behave like that. Maybe there are some, perhaps. Maybe it made for a good storyline. It was convenient. I mean, how many stories that are supposedly based in fact have changed things simply because they're more convenient and they make a better story? I mean, hopefully people have brains enough to know what's real and what isn't. And certainly we hope that people who read us and listen to us.
Well, then go to something more real. If you go away from the fiction, certainly if you look at almost any local news station, you look at the anchors and the female anchors. There does seem to be and always has been, as long as I can remember, a requirement of a certain degree of attractiveness in order to be a female anchor, and that extends also to reporters as well. If my 40 years in Hawaii makes any sense, you're Denby, you're not giving me you're giving me a funny look. Is that fair? Is that fair? Is that part of the newsroom culture in TV?
That people should be attractive.
That women in particular have to be attractive.
I don't think they have to be attractive so much. I mean, they just have to look normal and okay. But well, no, it's kind of funny in a newsroom. A woman definitely has to look more hair better, combed, because they'll call into a TV station if your hair is out of place. You could be saying, oh, the whole town is burning down and 50 people have died, and someone will call up, oh, that reporter's hair was very messy. They'll never do it about a man. It seems to me you have to look more neat so you're not distracted.
Yeah, they don't like your earrings, or they don't like your clothes. They'll call up and tell you. So.
Yeah, there was this nutty lady that I used to always pick up the call at KITV that didn't like Pamela Young's clothes. She's a German lady, and she just go on and on about it. Tell about how people should dress, and I don't think they do that to a man reporter. My husband was on TV, and he's a horrible dresser, mess. You never get a call you never got calls like that.
Well, I'd like to say whether you're a male or a female, I think there's a sense of pride and dignity that goes along with the job. So whether you're a man or a woman, don't sleep with your sources. Don't overdo it either way. Just be normal.
But in some cases, it's also written into your contract, certain behaviors, or I don't mean that, but how one goes out and faces the public. When I was a kid, one of my friend's moms worked for a TV station in LA, and that was flat out written into it. Her hair, her clothes, all of that stuff. She couldn't go out without having a full face of makeup on because they didn't want their product to be seen in any other way than the way most people saw her every night on TV. I don't know if those days have changed or how much latitude there is. I mean, there seems to be a lot more skin on TV. I mean, you see women anchors with spaghetti straps or with dresses that look like they're more appropriate to go out to dinner with their husbands than to be seen on TV. And so I think, having that sense of decorum would be a good thing, but not necessarily having somebody else say, you will wear this and you will wear that.
Next question?
Uh,
Move on, please.
Just wondering, Denby, you reported in Vietnam, and then you went back to Vietnam on a second tour, right? Both of those were before you were married, or one was after?
Well, I've actually been there 4 times. But
In reporting.
yeah, but
Would you have gone back if you had had if your daughter had been small at the time?
yes.
Without question.
Yeah, I like that. I was always interested in that war, and once you start covering it, you want to see what happens. It's just like you have kind of an ownership of it. So I probably wouldn't go if my daughter were small to go out on a Vietnam, you could kind of pick what you wanted to do there because it was a completely open war. It's the first war of that type for news coverage, and it will probably be the last. The reporters were just given free rein to go wherever they wanted to go. You could go wherever a military unit commander would let you go. If you wanted to go on a combat patrol, if they let you join that unit, you could do it. There was none of this embedded stuff or censorship. So I think if my daughter were small, I'd pick probably less. I wouldn't do very dangerous things because I wouldn't want to die and leave her orphan. So I would go and cover the war, probably cover the more political side and the more religious strife.
But would you have a choice always?
Yeah, you have a choice. I did always because I was a correspondent and left to pick my stories. But another way you see now reporters covering wars, they're not really, out on combat patrols. They're standing in hotels doing stand-ups, and other people are gathering the information for them. And then now it's so restricted, you can't go a lot of places.
But you had 3 children. Let's say they're young, and somebody says, Beth Ann, we want you to get on the bus, on a presidential bus, and you're gonna follow the presidential campaign starting out with, let's say, Hillary Clinton in 2016. But let's say the kids are small. Would you get on that bus and know what that was going to mean for the next 9 months or so?
Well, I'm not a reporter, so my life has been a little bit different in journalism in that way. But it's something that I've stopped to consider because there was a time when I thought I'd like to leave Hawaii and go do what I do on a much bigger scale in a different market altogether. But the happiness of my children was very important. I didn't have children to have somebody else raise them. I made a choice. And that's part of living with what you choose to do. That didn't mean I didn't do what I wanted to do, but I did it here because it was important for them. So no, I would probably not get on the bus unless there were real points where I could see my children and be there, particularly if they were in those very small years.
Would you get on the bus, Ken?
I probably would. I would. I think... Well, you talk to my children because they think having a mother as a reporter is awful because you constantly quiz them and you're asking them 50 questions, and I'll say, oh, keep away from this area because there was a murder over there, and a rape over there, because you know too much. And maybe that's why they didn't go into journalism, I don't know. But yeah, I would get on the bus. I think my kids were able to see that both their parents had careers and both their parents, loved what they chose, and I think you can have a balance. So I hope I was a good role model to them, and I hope that if my daughter or son chooses a profession and you have to make some sacrifices, but I think it works out in the end.
In a world where everybody's a journalist, right? Anybody who wants to blog, anybody who wants to get it, everybody's out there throwing their 2 cents in. Then is anybody a journalist anymore? And is that a danger to women who are trying to find a stronger place in the newsroom if there's no newsroom?
I don't know that it's a danger to women. I think it's a danger to journalism for sure. But I don't see that particularly as anything that's different for women or men. But there is a raging debate over who is a journalist these days, and it went on here last legislative session with the Shield Law. And the Shield Law kind of fell apart here a little bit because they couldn't figure out should they cover bloggers or not. And I mean, I think there's still a debate over what's a journalist and who's just sort of an ideologue in an echo chamber kind of thing. And but the more information that's out there, the better. So.
If there are other comments, I'm out of questions. You have a chance to ask questions of our panel. Does anyone have one? Do we need a mic? Do we have a mic? We don't need a mic. There is a mic. Somebody have a mic? Over there. There's one over there. Is there one over? Okay.
We lost our staff.
Testing. Hello?
Yeah.
I could just ask it. So I think that women in journalism is actually less about women making babies and more about women not appreciating their voice and having a platform for their voice to be heard and respected at the same level as men. So, like a lot of what this discussion I'm hearing, it seems to be curtailing how women are represented in the media and how women are treated kind of on a larger scale. Even right now I'm working at the state legislature and I see the power plays between men and women and so I just kind of, so at another conference I was at back in the Bay Area, Gloria Steinem and another one who started these media things for women. We're talking about how less women call in to news radio programs to tell their opinions, less women call in to write a letter to the editor and things like that. So if we could find a way to let women know, hey, your voice will be appreciated, you will be heard. I think it's kind of playing more on media and our the way women are portrayed. And to me, it's kind of ridiculous that we have to ask them about your babies and things like that. Like, I thought we're past babies. Like, let's move on past the babies. Are you gonna go with your baby? How are we going to let women know and let girls know that we're ready to hear your voice? Let's go. Let's have it, and we'll appreciate what you have to say. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a part of this discussion that we didn't have in our panel, and it's a two-part thing. One is to let women know if we're ready to hear your voice, but the other is for women to have that courage themselves to speak out and say, I demand you hear my voice. And that was one thing Jill Abramson said in this article we all read that was very fascinating, just asking her about becoming the executive editor for the first time in the New York Times history. And she was asked if the Sheryl Sandberg lean in, what do you take from lean in from your experience? And she said to women that you shouldn't self-edit yourself. And you shouldn't put yourself automatically on a back bench, say it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to be the boss of the New York Times. And the women that you're talking about to send more letters to the editor or more comments online, that's a message they need to hear, and I don't know where they get it, in their school or from their parents. And then certainly to have on the other side what you're recommending, a receptive saying, come on, write in, we want to hear you. But I think that's very interesting, and I think looking at why women aren't on top, that's something that's been investigated too, that they get very near, and then when they're competitors for a job, like our friend who's a Navy admiral, they're a Coast Guard admiral, there are going to be 4 other people that want that job. sometimes I think women hold back and they, I'm not looking for however they put it in their brain when they're sorting it out. But your question is really good and it's really true and hits to part of the problem that we didn't discuss at this table on the stage.
I could tell you though that a lot of my callers, most of them are women, not guys. And they do feel that it's a safe space in which to call and to talk because nobody's going to beat them up. We're going to just further, we say, there may be people who don't agree with them, but the idea is that we create this place where we can have conversations about all kinds of things, and it's really important, including the fact that for a lot of women, that pole between career and family is still very much alive, and that we can't discount their voices either because somebody's got to raise the babies, and somebody who wants to have children and just do that is just as important as someone else. I remember being at a cocktail party shortly after my first baby was born, and this woman said to me, "So what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm taking time from my job to be able to be with my son." She said, "Oh, so you're not doing anything." It was the most eviscerating moment I'd ever had because it was just not in my consciousness that somebody could see that as not being important. We have to honor all of those choices, but we have to know that when you make some of them, that means by that, by virtue of making this one, maybe you can't make this other one right now. But all those voices should be welcome. And that's one of the things I hope that we strive for, certainly when we have discussions on Town Square. And we tell everybody, you agree, you disagree, whatever, we want to hear from you. It's a welcome space.
I think on the internet now, we've never had a time when there's been so much, participation. They want you to vote on, who gets to win, who gets to stay on The Voice, and who gets to do this and that. And so I think there's so much more opportunity for you to give input, whether you're male or female. But there's just a portal, just go for it.
Well, there was a study that came out in February that said that for the first time in history, we have more women who are married to men who make less money than they do, where they're better educated than their husbands. So know that that dynamic is changing. It's always been changing, but now it's continuing to change. And that, I think, will begin to inform some of what Demby was talking about earlier, about what happens with power and how power is exercised and how women choose to exercise that power and how it will be different than the way that men do it now.
Are there other questions? Ma'am?
Okay, I can just try to project. Sorry. Okay.
Speak loudly.
Debbie, you mentioned something about women feeling shy or about being boastful, and Catherine, you touched briefly on dress, but I was wondering if there was any, have you guys ever personally,
if you ever personally felt that there were general expectations to act a certain way in this specific profession? This question is on act or dress specifically.
No, but I can mention that this past session, someone came up to me and said, I've noticed, that more women are wearing sleeveless tops and this, that, and the other. And so I mentioned it to my boss. I said, just FYI, this is what the perception is. But things are changing. We used to all wear suits and jackets, and everything is just so much more casual now. But I don't know, as far as being expected to behave, I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding the question.
I think I do. Like, I have a friend who's an engineer, and she's very smart, got every talent you'd ever want, and she's considered in her office a bitch. So it's some of that, but you don't hear that so much in newsrooms because everyone's pretty aggressive. You have to be, and especially at TV because you got to turn. Well, we used to do like one big story a day, but as we were working in a smaller newsroom, I was working with Catherine. We were doing like 2 or 3 big stories every day, so we're very, very tough. You have to be. If someone doesn't want to talk to you, you got to make them talk to you because you got to get that story out. But the only kind of criticism I ever got from that way was from a cameraman from Channel 2 who got mad at me because he was trying to horn in on an interview that I had set up, and TV had changed so much then they were sending out cameramen without reporters. So these cameramen would try and butt in on the reporter's interview because they didn't really know how to ask questions, and they just stick their microphone out. So I told him to get out of there, get away, get out of my interview. And then he was yelling at me. He said, "You're upsetting the people that you're interviewing." And I told him, "Well, I don't care. You're not going to share this interview with me." But then later, he was still so mad at me that we were covering the legislative session, and he wouldn't let our camera get into the place where we needed to be. And he told me, he said, "You're a horrible person. You're just like Barbara Walters." So I told him, "Oh, thank you. I hope I can be as good as her someday. She's one of the great people. I like her so much." So, but I know what you mean about behavior, but I didn't really see that much in the newsroom. Everyone is pretty tolerant because you're under such pressure to work so hard.
I've seen female bosses who were more bitchy than they needed to be, and I don't know if because they're trying to be tough, but I don't think you really need to be that way. Just be a fair boss, be a good journalist, and I don't know. I just wish we didn't have to think about whether you're a woman or a man. Just good journalism, and I think that's what's in jeopardy. I think we mentioned that. You're worried about journalists in the future.
So, well, one thought I had listening to that discussion is, women journalists, and probably women in all professions, but in journalism, you kind of act differently in different situations, and I think male reporters probably do the same thing here. But what I mean by that is, if you're a young female cop reporter and you're covering a police department, you're going to use that to your advantage, that you know that these guys are going to be much more willing to call you at midnight and tell you there's been a great murder you want to go out on or whatever, than they are going to be to call your male counterpart, because it's very definitely a sexual kind of play that's going on. I covered the oil and gas business for a long time, which was a very professional kind of thing. But because I presented myself in a business suit kind of thing, and came across as a executive, industry kind of person, and not some just like, kind of hippie reporter chick with a notebook, I got a lot more out of that beat than people who, did not sort of dress the part or did not look the part. And so that's above and beyond knowing your material and knowing what it is, being well schooled in your subject matter. It is, you do have to kind of look the part or play the part, but you kind of do it to your advantage, I think. I don't know.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
It's you.
Anyway, so I want to thank you all for being here. It's a privilege to, it really is a privilege to hear you speak and everything. In undergrad, I went to school here in Alumni. I did take an intro to journalism class, and you might know Jackie Young. Yes, so she's actually one of my friends I met, and I was interested in her project, and I joined her team. And it was interesting, the feedback I got. We talked about media and how it underplays a lot of social issues, and I talked about how poverty is not talked about, and it's not, the media makes it sound like, oh, it doesn't really happen here, but it does, and everything. I talk about different things, right? So I use all these different resources, and we got to give feedback to each other. And someone said, "Oh, you're a communist." And of course, they remained anonymous. They didn't want to say who they were, and I thought that was interesting that they would make that comment. But I was going to go into journalism, but I got accepted to nursing school, so I did that. But and I got my graduate degree in child analysis and mental health nursing. Yeah, so Jack is always saying, like, you can still do journalism, you'd be really good at it. And I was just like, don't know. But I want to know more about, I guess, because my passion is in mental health, recovery, and advocacy, and that's really important to me. I don't see a lot of it talked about. At least the perspective on it is more like looking at the few people that do, horrendous crimes and, happen to have mental illness, and not a lot of talk about recovery and everything, the Murphy Bill and all that stuff. So I just wanted to know, what's out there regarding this, and and I think journalism is a great way to be out there and talk about what's happening and everything, and also appearances are really important, I think, as well. I actually try to be on the board of directors in my the new condo I moved in, it's interesting that I had I talked about my former experience as a board of directors in other community settings, no one else had experience, but they still chose the men. And that was interesting. The next year, I talked some more about stuff, and they're like, "Oh, you should be on the board." But it's interesting that's appearances are interesting.
Let me go to one thing. What about she brings up the question of mental health and beats. Isn't for men or women in journalism nowadays, people who have beats that can get in as deeply into or doing long form journalism, it just isn't around anymore, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. In our newsroom and in a lot of the other newsrooms, I think, across the country, they've just moved away from beat systems. And I think it's a shame, because I think you know the system, you know how it works, you know the people, you get ahead of the stories, you know what the issues are. We're spread so thin that everything's on the fly, it's down and dirty, it's very superficial, which I think is too bad. But I agree.
We're actually organized on a beat system at Civil Beat, and we have 5 or 6 different topics, that reporters are assigned to. So they develop an expertise like that. And then we also do have the luxury of doing long form and deeper dive projects. That's kind of what Civil Beat is set up to do. And so, we sacrifice breaking news and not being able to cover a lot of things on a daily basis, and our journalists are kind of competitive, and so we'll often get into little fights in the newsroom about whether we should cover this or not cover that, and then we'll say, oh, well, the TV is going to do that, or the star advertiser is going to do that, so we'll just let it go. But we really want to do it, but then we try to pull back and think, what can we do that's more in depth on this subject? And so, mental health would be a great piece for us. And in fact, one of our reporters is, delving deeply into the state hospital and what's going on there. It's sort of framed around a breaking news issue, of course, with problems at the state hospital, but it's going to expand into more mental health coverage. And so we're happy to be able to do that.
Then mental health, I think that's covered quite a bit now, but in different, before when there were beats, you'd have the health reporter doing it, or I used to do a lot of mental health stories as a political reporter because I'm personally interested in it. I have some family members that are mentally ill, and as a reporter, you kind of pick things that interest you too. There's a whole table full of things you could cover. But now mental health seems to be in almost every story. The homeless, the prison, Civil Beat did a very good story about the percentage of prisoners that are really there because they're mentally ill. So you have that, homeless, and to think of what else. And then also you always have an ongoing issue in mental health of people not getting covered. So that comes under Obamacare. What kind of insurance coverage is there for that? When I was younger, there was none. It was kind of your fault that you're mentally ill. And thankfully, that changed.
We've been covering mental illness for as long as Town Square has been on the air, which I think this year is either 14 or 15 years, because we needed to have a place where we could have a deep dive discussion about it. That and anything else. Because of the way the talk department is set up. We really don't have beats. If something is important for us to be talking about, if we need to be able to draw ourselves together, I mean, look, we're an island state. We can't drive over from one to another and see each other, but we can meet over the airwaves. We can have really good discussions and hear each other if there's a place for us to hear each other, particularly when we're talking about difficult issues. And mental illness is one of the most difficult because although we're talking about it a lot now, there's still relatively little understood about it, and in practice and in the way those who are mentally ill are treated, there's so much more we have to go. And you can talk to them at NAMI Hawaii, you can talk to them at Mental Health American Hawaii Chapter, all kinds of organizations that are so busy because they don't have enough people to be able to do a lot of things that you were talking about.
I thought there was a question over here. Was there? Oh, there's one up there. There's one down here. There's one up there. Where did you go, Mike? Oh, there you went. Okay. That wasn't either one that I was pointing to. Mike, we have to coordinate this. Oh, go ahead.
You mentioned sports or mental health or some other field as not covered enough or attractive enough to cover. But I think academia is another such area, you know, whether by male or female journalists or TV, broadcasters. Why is that? Every time we hear about the university, it's always some crisis, some investigation, what has been going on. I don't know why. I remember when I first came to UH, in the 70s, there was Helen Alton, I think, was her name.
Yes.
And she was terrific, you know.
Fabulous. Fabulous is the word.
Very good coverage of not only the grim aspects of boring aspects of academia, but also science and the state of intellectual advancement that the university provides. But is this some kind of unwritten bias or whatever, you know? No one since Helen Alton has covered the university consistently along lines that are not sensational or crisis leading or whatever.
So
it's been like 30, 40 years since Alton was.
I think that I worked with her, and when I was writing on the Boring Women's page when I first started, she was one of the few female reporters, and she used to sit there. She had earphones. This was before people did. Every day people have them now, but she'd sit there and just pound out these stories on an old typewriter. But I think the problem now is the newsrooms are so small. That was the olden days when they were huge, like our newsroom at the Star Bulletin is just, seems now compared to today, gigantic. So people, reporters now just have to cover really breaking news. We especially, Catherine and I, felt that at KITV. And reporters, by being curious, are very interested in the kind of stories at the university. There's something here for any one of us. I went to a talk because I'm a donor to the business school, and there's a mushroom expert here at the UH. He's up on Hilo, and he's talking about all these endemic Hawaii mushrooms that grow nowhere else in the world. Some of them edible, some will kill you if you wanted to murder someone. Very rare, something the police could probably never discover. But for my answer to that is not enough people to do the kind of stories that reporters love to do. And Helen was fabulous.
She was the best.
That's why it winds up on public radio.
Yeah, there you go.
But I do agree with that assessment. People, the stats have just been cut back so much. You used to have a higher education reporter at every newsroom that covered colleges. But now, like in our newsroom, we have one education reporter, Leah Wong, who does a good job trying to keep up with K-12 and higher ed and private schools and public schools and school issues and all sorts of stuff. But one person is spread really thin. So.
And there was a time when Denby and I were covering the legislature together. And then they got away from Beats, and they had Denby doing both city government and state government. And I used to be the city hall reporter, so it's just changed so much. You just don't have the bodies, you don't have the time, and you have to, post on Twitter and Facebook, and you just don't have the time.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing your time, your experience, your knowledge. You're all seasoned journalists, and we need to see more journalists come into being. And I was at a gathering this morning, and it was about nursing, developing nursing capacity and leadership in the community. And it was unique for 3 reasons. One, it was funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant. The second was a comprehensive plan, so it was advancing RNs to BSNs, BSNs to masters and masters to doctorate degrees. And it was also this united push to get more nurses into the boardrooms, onto different community leadership roles. And the third thing was that they included folks from outside of the nursing industry, right? So it was broadening the context of who should be engaged and who should understand the importance of this. And so is there any such thing for increasing capacity of women, people of color, diversity in journalism? And is journalism something that's so specific that it's something that should be done on its own or with other people?
Well, so there are professional conferences for journalists, and not too long ago, I think it was in November, one of the big journalist organizations, it's called Investigative Reporters and Editors, actually came here to Honolulu and did some workshops for the local media. The Society of Professional Journalists held a workshop, held its annual conference a month or so ago. And so, so there are those kinds of things for journalists, but, and then there are women journalists organization, there's Asian journalists, there's, I think the National Association of Black Journalists is still active. So there are those kinds of things, but nothing like you're talking about, I think.
And we don't have a journalism school. I mean, communications are one thing, but specifically a journalism school is something that's a little bit different and more stratified.
Right down there.
I have a question in terms of so for a young journalist, when it comes to hiring, what would give us an edge? Is it like data visualization or photo or video, social media? Like what would get me a job?
Get you a job where, first of all? I mean, any job or?
Just into journalism in general. Because I'm thinking online is probably.
So we hire specifically for a job that we want to fill, So it would kind of depend on the time, but I do think that it's really great to have those skills that you just mentioned. Data visualization is huge right now, and something that we want to get more into. And there was a time when everyone was into video on the web, and I remember the paper I worked at in Arizona, our boss wanted to buy these little flip cams for everybody and wanted the reporters to take these little flip cams around and so, but it was, hugely resisted because you can't really take notes in a notebook and film somebody and so there are these fads, Mojo's Global Journalist was a thing that has happened, I think, thankfully on, where backpack journalists, where you take everything in a backpack and you don't even leave your car is your office, and that kind of stuff is just sort of a fad, but it is good to have basic video skills, video editing skills. Data journalism is, like I said, the thing that's like really now, but you really just need to be a good reporter and a good writer, and there's lots of things that go into that, which is knowing how to interview people, knowing how to get along with people, being able to find stories. There's just all of those basic skills are what's really fundamental, and then some of these kind of bells and whistles systems are sort of on top of that, I think.
I would say to you, all of the above that you just said, but I used to interview interns, help do that, and one thing I always want to know from people is how much do you love news? I mean, people, especially in TV, they come wanting to be an anchor person. they didn't really love news. And so a question we worked up was, what do you read? What magazines? Like, I wanted to see someone that lived and died for news. This was, I didn't hire like Patty does, but for helping with our interns. So I definitely want to see that you love news and that you're very curious and that you're reading news, that you read even old-fashioned newspapers. Because there's a lot of information there.
I can tell you that in this market, there is this thing called video journalists, animal that's emerged, and it may be different for online and newspapers, but they are hiring for video journalists, and so they want you to do both, and so that is a reality, and the lines are blurred. Our station, fortunately, still keeps the traditional mode of photographer, reporter, and we usually go out as a team. And sometimes the photographer goes out just to get the pictures, but the other stations are hiring, and they want you to do both. They want you to do web, they want you to post video, they want you to shoot video, they want you to take pictures, so you've got to do all of that. So I think whether you're going online or you're going a traditional newspaper, you have to have all those skills.
And when I talk to interns who come to us, and most of them I will tell you I don't take because they have a fantasy idea about what it's like to be at a public radio station and not understanding how all the things you talk about integrate with what we do and how we are beginning to create content that moves elsewhere and changes and morphs and partners with others, and especially that whole collaboration model that we're working with a lot. Those things are really important, but you also have to love the very essence of what it means to be transmitting a story with the human voice and really just loving radio. So for someone who tells me, yeah, I'm a news junkie, but I never listen to public radio, probably not going to be one of my interns. And by the same token, having somebody who looks really great on paper, but has absolutely no real sense of inner urgency to find answers and to be curious about it and really want to know until you push it, until you get that feeling in your gut where that's it. That kind of thing, those are those intangible things that happen when you sit down and talk to somebody. So you've got to figure out kind of what kind of journalist you want to be and what best takes advantage of your skills and what gives you joy. Don't ever discount that factor. It's important.
As an old college professor, I know drooping eyelids when I see them, and it means we're out of